The October wind carried the scent of fallen leaves through the screen door as I dragged my suitcase across the threshold of my childhood home. 3 years had passed since I'd last walked through these familiar rooms, and everything seemed smaller somehow, as if my absence had compressed the space into something more intimate, more fragile. "Emily!" Clara's voice rang from the kitchen, warm and breathless. At 7 months pregnant, my sister moved with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo. Her face glowed with that mythical pregnancy radiance everyone talks about, though I could see the exhaustion lurking beneath her smile. "Look at you," I said, embracing her gently, my hands instinctively finding the curve of her belly. "You're absolutely radiant." She laughed, pressing her hand over mine. "I feel like a beached whale, but thank you for lying so beautifully." Her eyes searched my face. "I can't believe you're really here. David will be so happy to see you when he gets home from the office." David, my brother-in-law of 2 years, the steady accountant who'd swept my sister off her feet with his quiet reliability. I'd always liked him well enough. He made Clara happy, and that was enough for me. But standing in this house again, I realized how little I actually knew about the man my sister had married. "Why don't you get settled?" Clara suggested, already turning toward the stairs with that slow, deliberate pace. "Your old room is ready. I'll start dinner." "Absolutely not," I said, catching her arm. "You're going to sit down and put your feet up. I'll handle dinner. That's why I'm here, remember?" She smiled gratefully, and I watched her sink into the living room couch with a soft sigh of relief. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in golden light that made the space feel suspended in time, peaceful. I was unpacking in the living room later that evening, sorting through books and photo albums that Clara had moved to make space for the nursery, when it happened. A worn paperback copy of Jane Eyre slipped from my hands, and as it hit the floor, something fluttered out from between its pages, a photograph face down on the hardwood. My heart performed some strange acrobatic feat as I picked it up and turned it over. The image was like a punch to the solar plexus. There was David, but not the David I knew. This version was younger, his hair longer, his smile unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. His arms were wrapped around a woman with dark, flowing hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. They were clearly in love. Their bodies leaned into each other with the magnetic pull of two people who couldn't bear to be apart. But this woman wasn't Clara. My hands trembled as I turned the photograph over. In faded blue ink, someone had written, "David and Rachel, forever and always, June 2021. June 2021. My mind raced, calculating. David and Clara had gotten married in August 2022. This photo was taken just over a year before their wedding. I stared at the image until my vision blurred, trying to reconcile this passionate, carefree David with the reserved man who now carefully helped my pregnant sister navigate stairs and remembered to buy her favorite ice cream. Who was Rachel, and why was her photograph hidden in a book, like some buried treasure, some secret too dangerous to display but too precious to throw away? The sound of David's key in the front door made me jump. I quickly slipped the photograph back into the book, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When he walked into the living room, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up after a long day, I searched his face for the man in the photograph. "Emily!" He genuinely seemed pleased to see me, his smile warm and familiar. "Clara said you made it in safely. How was the drive?" "Fine. I managed, just fine." But as we talked about my job, my apartment, the weather, all those surface-level conversations that fill space without revealing anything, I found myself studying David with new eyes. There was something in the way he glanced toward the bookshelf, in the careful way he positioned himself between me and those volumes, as if he were unconsciously guarding them. When Clara emerged from the kitchen, moving slowly but determinedly, David's entire demeanor shifted. He rushed to her side, his hand finding the small of her back, his voice softening to that particular tone reserved for her alone. "You should be resting," he murmured, and I heard genuine concern, genuine love. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Clara replied, but she leaned into his touch. Watching them together, I felt the photograph burning in my memory like a brand. This was my sister's husband, the father of her unborn child, the man she trusted completely. And somewhere, buried in his past, was a love so intense that even now, years later, he kept a photograph of it hidden like contraband. That night, lying in my childhood bed while the house settled around me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself that what I had found was harmless. People had pasts. David never pretended Clara was his first love. The photograph could be innocent nostalgia, nothing more. But the way it had been hidden, tucked away like some secret too dangerous to display but too precious to throw away, that felt like betrayal. And the date, so close to his relationship with Clara, made my stomach churn with implications I didn't want to consider.
The next morning, I woke to find Clara already in the kitchen, moving carefully around the small space as she prepared breakfast. David had left early for work, she explained, kissing my cheek as she set a plate before me. Her pregnancy had made her more affectionate, more openly emotional, and I found myself memorizing these moments. The way she hummed unconsciously, the protective curve of her hand over her belly, the contentment that seemed to radiate from her despite her obvious discomfort. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, settling across from me with her own plate. "I've been feeling, I don't know, emotional, I guess. Everything feels so significant now." She pressed her hand to her stomach. "I keep thinking about Mom and Dad, wishing they could meet their grandchild." Our parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The reason I'd moved across the country, to escape the weight of memories, to start fresh where everything didn't remind me of loss. Now, watching Clara navigate this monumental life change without them, I felt that familiar ache of their absence. "They would be so proud of you," I said softly. "You're going to be an amazing mother." Clara's eyes filled with tears, another pregnancy side effect, she claimed, though I wondered if there was something deeper there. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, settling across from me with her own plate. "I've been feeling, I don't know, emotional, I guess. Everything feels so significant now." She pressed her hand to her stomach. "I keep thinking about Mom and Dad, wishing they could meet their grandchild." Our parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The reason I'd moved across the country, to escape the weight of memories, to start fresh where everything didn't remind me of loss. Now, watching Clara navigate this monumental life change without them, I felt that familiar ache of their absence. "They would be so proud of you," I said softly. "You're going to be an amazing mother." Clara's eyes filled with tears, another pregnancy side effect, she claimed, though I wondered if there was something deeper there. "I hope so. Sometimes I feel like I don't know anything about anything, like I'm pretending to be a grown-up and everyone's going to figure out I'm faking it." "That's called being human," I assured her, but her words planted a seed of unease. Was her emotional state purely hormonal, or was she sensing something amiss in her marriage? Over the following days, I found myself studying David and Clara's interactions with the intensity of a detective. On the surface, they seemed like any expectant couple. He brought her tea without being asked. She teased him about his growing collection of baby care books. But underneath, I began to notice hairline cracks in their perfect facade. David received phone calls that he took in another room, speaking in hushed tones that made Clara's face tighten, almost imperceptibly. He stayed up late some nights, claiming work deadlines, but I could hear him pacing in his study rather than typing. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his expression would go distant, almost melancholy, as if he were seeing something or someone that wasn't there. Clara, meanwhile, had developed a habit of watching David when she thought he wasn't aware. Her gaze would linger on him during dinner, searching his face with a quiet intensity that suggested she was looking for something she couldn't quite name. Once, I caught her staring at their wedding photo on the mantel, her expression unreadable. 3 days into my visit, I made an excuse about needing supplies from town and drove to the local library. If Rachel had lived here, if she'd been part of David's life in this small community, someone would remember her. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, had taught both Clara and I in Sunday school. She remembered everyone who'd ever lived in our town, their family histories stretching back generations. "Rachel Morrison," she said, when I asked, her voice dropping to that particular tone reserved for gossip. "Oh my, I haven't heard that name in years. Lovely girl, but troubled family situation. Her father owned the hardware store until it went under. Bad investments, I heard. They left town quite suddenly, middle of the night practically. Must have been, 3 years ago now?" 3 years. Right around the time David and Clara started getting serious. "She was engaged to someone local, wasn't she?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with the pleasure of someone who loves sharing a good story. "Not engaged, exactly, but everyone expected it. She was with David Hartwell for the longest time. Inseparable, those two. High school sweethearts who just kept going. Her family's financial troubles put quite a strain on things, though. David was just starting his accounting practice, trying to build something stable. And the Morrisons, well, they had debts, significant ones." My chest tightened. "What happened?" "One day she was here, next day gone. Left David quite devastated from what I heard. He didn't talk about it much. You know how private he is. But Clara Patterson was such a blessing to him. She helped him heal from all that heartbreak." Clara Patterson. My maiden name, which my sister had kept professionally. I felt sick. "Did Rachel ever come back? To visit, I mean." Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Not that I know of, dear. Some stories don't get happy endings, I suppose." I left the library feeling like I'd been hollowed out, scooped empty, and left fragile. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't pretty. David and Rachel had been serious, long-term, planning a future together. Her family's financial crisis had driven a wedge between them, or maybe she'd left to spare him the burden of their debts. Either way, she'd disappeared, and David, wounded and vulnerable, had found solace with my kind, stable, uncomplicated sister. But if Rachel had never come back, why keep her photograph? That question was answered 2 days later in the most devastating way possible. I was in town picking up groceries when I saw them, David and a woman I didn't recognize, standing outside the coffee shop in what was clearly an intense conversation. The woman was petite, with dark hair, and even from a distance I could see the tension in both their postures. David's hands moved as he spoke, gesticulating in a way that suggested frustration or pleading. The woman kept shaking her head, backing away, but something kept her there, kept her engaged in whatever painful dialogue they were having. When she turned slightly, I caught sight of her profile, and my heart stopped. It was Rachel. Older, more tired-looking than in the photograph, but unmistakably the woman whose image was hidden in my sister's bookshelf. She was here, in town, talking to my brother-in-law while my pregnant sister was at home, trusting and unaware. I ducked into the nearby drugstore, watching through the window as their conversation continued. Whatever David was saying, Rachel wasn't buying it. She kept stepping back, putting distance between them, but her body language suggested this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. There was a familiarity to their positioning, a rehearsed quality that spoke of previous encounters. Finally, Rachel walked away, and David stood alone on the sidewalk, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of defeat. He looked older somehow, worn down by whatever burden he was carrying. I waited until he was gone before venturing out, my mind racing. Rachel was back in town,
and she and David were clearly in communication. But what did it mean? Was this an affair? A rekindling of old feelings? Or something else entirely? That evening, I watched David and Clara with new eyes, searching for signs of guilt, deception, or distraction. David seemed more attentive than usual, helping Clara with small tasks, asking repeatedly if she was comfortable. But his solicitudeness felt forced, as if he were overcompensating for something. Clara, for her part, seemed more subdued. She picked at her dinner, excused herself early, and spent most of the evening reading in bed. When David went to check on her, I heard the murmur of their voices through the walls, his tone gentle, hers short and clipped. Something was wrong. The question was whether Clara already suspected something, or if she was simply picking up on the emotional undercurrents without understanding their source. That night, unable to sleep again, I found myself in the living room, staring at the bookshelf where I'd found Rachel's photograph. In the darkness, the familiar spine seemed to hold secrets, each book a potential hiding place for more evidence of David's deception. I was torn between loyalty to my sister and the growing need to understand what I'd stumbled into. Clara deserved the truth, didn't she? But she was 7 months pregnant, vulnerable, dependent on David's support. What if the truth destroyed everything she'd built her future on? And what if I was wrong? What if David's conversation with Rachel had been innocent, a chance encounter with an old friend? What if my suspicions were poisoning something that was actually pure? But even as I tried to convince myself of these possibilities, I knew in my heart that something significant was happening. The photograph, the secret phone calls, the clandestine meeting, they all pointed to a truth that Clara needed to know, regardless of the consequences. The question was, did I have the courage to be the one to tell her?
The next morning brought an unseasonably warm day, the kind of October weather that felt like a gift. Clara suggested we take a walk to the lake, and I agreed, hoping the fresh air might clear my head and give me the courage to broach the subject that had been consuming me. We walked slowly, accommodating Clara's careful pace, our conversation meandering through safe topics, my work, her preparations for the baby, memories of our childhood by this same lake. But I could feel the weight of unspoken truth between us, growing heavier with each step. Finally, as we settled on our favorite bench overlooking the water, Clara turned to me with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. "Emily," she said quietly, "there's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart stopped. Of course. You've been different since you got here. Watching David and me, asking questions around town. Mrs. Henderson called. She was worried about you. Said you seemed upset when you left the library. Clara's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "If there's something you think I should know, please tell me. I can't stand this feeling that everyone knows something I don't." The moment stretched between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. But looking at my sister, really looking at her, I saw not just a pregnant woman who needed protection, but a strong, intelligent person who deserved the truth, regardless of how painful it might be. "There's something I found," I said quietly, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. "In the house? In one of your books? A photograph." Clara's face went very still. "What kind of photograph?" I described what I'd found, watching as understanding dawned in her eyes. She didn't seem shocked, exactly, more like someone who'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it but knowing it was inevitable. "Rachel," she said simply. "You know about her?" Clara nodded slowly. "I know David loved someone before me. I know she left suddenly, and it hurt him deeply. What I don't know is why he still has her picture, or why her name makes him look like he's seen a ghost. I took a deep breath. Clara, I saw them together, yesterday, in town. They were talking, and it wasn't a casual conversation. They both looked intense, like this wasn't the first time. The color drained from her face. For a long moment she sat perfectly still, staring out over the water. When she spoke, her voice was steady but hollow. How long do you think this has been going on? I don't know. Maybe not long. Rachel seems to have just come back to town. But Clara, I could be wrong about what I saw. Maybe there's an innocent explanation. She shook her head. No, you're not wrong. I've felt it. The distance in David lately. The way he looks at me sometimes like he's seeing someone else. The late nights, the phone calls. Her hand moved protectively over her belly. I just kept hoping I was imagining things. What do you want to do? Clara was quiet for a long time, and I watched her face cycle through emotions, hurt, anger, fear, and finally a kind of resigned determination. I want to talk to him. Tonight. All of us together. If there are secrets in my marriage, if there are things I need to know before this baby comes, then I need to know them now. That evening, the three of us sat in the living room, like actors preparing for a play none of us wanted to perform. I had positioned myself between Clara and David on the couch, as if I could somehow shield my sister from whatever was about to unfold. David, Clara began, her voice steadier than I'd expected. We need to talk about Rachel. The name hung in the air like a curse. David went very still, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and finally resignation. He looked from Clara to me and back again, and I saw the exact moment he realized that secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of revealing themselves. Clara, he started, then stopped, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of distress. The truth, David, Clara said quietly. Whatever it is, I need to hear it. All of it. And so he told us. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush, as if a dam had finally burst. He told us about Rachel, about their love that felt eternal, about her family's financial collapse and the pressure it had put on their relationship. He described how she'd left without explanation, leaving only a note saying she couldn't be the burden that held him back from building the stable future he deserved. For months, I didn't know where she was. I looked for her, called everyone I could think of. Then I met your sister, and Clara was... He looked at her with genuine tenderness. Clara was light after so much darkness. She was stability and kindness and everything I thought I needed to heal. But you never stopped loving Rachel, she said. It wasn't a question. David was quiet for a long moment, and he said, I thought I had. When we got married, when we started planning for the baby, I believed I'd moved on completely. But then she came back to town last month, and seeing her again, he shook his head. It didn't bring back the love exactly, but it brought back all the unfinished business, all the things we never got to say to each other.
What does she want? I asked. Closure, I think. The same thing I wanted. She told me she left because she was pregnant. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Clara's intake of breath was sharp, pained. She was pregnant with your child? She thought she was. It turned out to be a false alarm, but by then she'd already left town, already started a new life. She spent 3 years thinking she'd given up everything for nothing, and I spent 3 years thinking she'd abandoned me without caring enough to explain why. Clara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. So what happens now?
now that you both know the truth? David moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. Now nothing happens. Clara, I won't pretend that seeing Rachel again didn't affect me. It did. It made me remember who I was before, made me wonder about the life we might have had. But that life is over. It was over 3 years ago, and it's still over now. How can I believe that? Clara whispered. How can I trust that you won't wake up tomorrow and realize you're with the wrong woman? Because, David said, his voice strong and clear, Rachel was the love of my youth, but you're the love of my life. What Rachel and I had was passionate and intense and probably unsustainable. What you and I have is real. It's built on trust and partnership and genuine friendship. You're carrying my child, Clara. You're my partner in everything that matters. That's not consolation prize. That's everything I actually want. The room fell silent except for Clara's quiet crying. I watched my sister wrestle with everything she'd just learned, saw her weighing love against betrayal, trust against doubt. Finally, she looked up at David with red-rimmed eyes. I need you to promise me something. Anything. I need you to promise that if you ever have doubts again, if you ever wonder about the road not taken, you'll talk to me instead of hiding it. I can't compete with a ghost, David, but I can deal with an honest conversation. I promise, he said without hesitation. And I need you to get rid of the photograph. David nodded, understanding immediately. He went to the bookshelf, retrieved Jane Eyre, and pulled out the photo I'd found days earlier. Without ceremony, he tore it in half, then in half again, the pieces fluttering into the fireplace like autumn leaves. As we watched the fragments burn, I felt something shift in the room. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. The foundation of Clara and David's marriage had been shaken, but it hadn't crumbled. If anything, it might emerge stronger for having survived the earthquake. 2 weeks later, I was packing to return to my own life when Clara went into labor. David and I took turns holding her hands through the contractions, and when their daughter finally arrived, red-faced and furious and perfect, I watched my brother-in-law cry as he held his child for the first time. She's beautiful, Rachel might have said, if things had been different. But Rachel wasn't there, and David wasn't thinking about her. He was completely present, completely committed to the family he had chosen and the life he had built. Standing in that hospital room, watching Clara nurse her daughter while David hovered nearby with the devoted attention of a man who knew exactly where he belonged, I learned something important about the nature of love and truth. Secrets don't protect the people we love. They isolate them. Truth, even when it's painful, creates the possibility for real intimacy, real trust. David's honesty about Rachel hadn't destroyed his marriage. It had given Clara the opportunity to choose him again fully informed about what that choice meant. And Clara's courage in demanding the truth hadn't cost her the security she needed. It had given her something more valuable, a partner who respected her enough to be vulnerable, to admit his doubts and fears instead of hiding them away like contraband. 3 months later, I got a photo in the mail. Clara, David, and baby Sarah, all of them glowing with the exhausted joy of new parenthood. On the back, Clara had written, "Thank you for helping us find our way to the truth. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." I put the photo on my refrigerator, where I could see it every day. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for the people we care about is refuse to let them live in illusion. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak the truth, even when, especially when, it might change everything. In the end, David and Clara's story wasn't about choosing between past and present, between passion and stability. It was about choosing honesty over comfort, vulnerability over safety, and the hard work of real love over the easy fiction of perfect romance. And that, I thought, was a much better foundation for a marriage than any secret photograph hidden in the pages of a book.